The wind outside Piper's Milwaukee apartment cut like broken glass, rattling the window panes as if the city itself was trying to get in. Inside, the place was silent. No TV, no music, just the low hum of the heater fighting a losing battle against December. Piper stood barefoot on the cold floor, staring at her phone, the screen glowing too bright in the dark. One message. 12 words. A cruel little ultimatum that felt heavier than the snow piling up outside. Don't come for Christmas. Your sister can't handle it. Piper was 32 years old, a data analyst who believed, stupidly she would later realize, that hard work and loyalty eventually paid off. She believed that if you showed up, stayed calm, did the right thing, people would meet you halfway. That belief shattered right there in her living room, with a Christmas band delivered by text like a parking ticket. Her mother didn't ask, didn't explain, just chose. Again. Outside, somewhere down the block, a siren wailed. Then another. Piper barely noticed at first. Her hands were shaking too badly as she scrolled back through the message, hoping she'd misunderstood, hoping there was a follow-up. Just kidding. We'll talk. Anything. Nothing came to be. 11:55 p.m., her phone finally rang. The sound made her flinch. When she answered, she didn't hear her mother. She didn't hear an apology. She heard panic, and behind it, unmistakable police sirens screaming through the night. "What the hell did you do?" her sister yelled, breathless and wild. "Why are there 2 police cars here?" Piper froze. 2 police cars. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice small, confused, already bracing for impact. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," her sister snapped. "Mom is freaking out. The neighbors are outside. Cops are everywhere. What did you tell them?" Piper stared at the wall, her mind racing. She hadn't called anyone. She hadn't said a word. She'd been alone, completely alone, since that text came through. And yet, somehow she was being blamed. Again, that if you've ever been the responsible one in your family, the quiet one, the one who cleans up messes they didn't make, you already know that sinking feeling. The moment you realize the story has been written without you, and you're the villain in it. Before we go any further, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, because what happened next didn't just tear this family apart, it exposed years of lies that were finally about to come crashing down. And if you've ever felt pushed out, accused, or erased by your own blood, drop a like so more people hear this story. Because those sirens, they weren't random. And the truth behind why they were there would change everything. The cracks in Piper's family didn't start with the sirens. They started months earlier at her father's funeral. Quietly, politely, wrapped in black coats and forced condolences. For 2 years before that day, Piper had put her entire life on pause. She moved back into her parents' house when her father's diagnosis turned terminal. Around-the-clock care became her normal. Medication schedules taped to the fridge. Sleepless nights on the couch listening for labored breathing. Missed promotions. Cancelled vacations. Relationships that faded because there was never time, never energy, never space for happiness. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself family comes first. Her sister Cynthia was nowhere to be found during any of it. Cynthia lived 2 states away and always had a reason. Work was crazy. Travel was exhausting. Seeing Dad like that would be too traumatic. Piper didn't argue. She didn't complain. She just stayed. She held her father's hand when the pain got bad. She was there when he whispered apologies for being a burden. She was there when he took his last breath. And then at the funeral, Cynthia finally appeared. She swept in wearing expensive designer clothes that didn't match the gray November sky, her makeup flawless, her hair styled like this was a photo shoot instead of a goodbye. She barely looked at the casket. Instead, she kept adjusting her position, angling her face toward the light, snapping quiet selfies with red eyes that looked practiced. Not broken. She didn't hug Piper. She didn't say thank you. The first thing Cynthia asked, before the service was even over, was whether Dad's life insurance policy had been finalized. Piper thought she'd misheard. She hoped she had. A few days later, her mother cornered her in the kitchen. The house still smelled like flowers and grief, and the chair where her father used to sit was painfully empty. Her mother laid a thick stack of legal documents on the table like a verdict. "You need to sign these," she said. Not meeting Piper's eyes, Piper skimmed the pages, her chest tightening with every line. It was a full forfeiture of her inheritance. Everything, savings, property interests, personal assets, redirected to Cynthia. "What is this?" Piper asked quietly. "Your sister is struggling," her mother replied, finally looking up. "She made some bad investments. She needs help. You have a stable job. You'll be fine." Piper stared at her, stunned. "I gave up 2 years of my life," she said. "I took care of Dad. Cynthia wasn't even here." Her mother's voice hardened. "Don't start. Be the bigger person. You've always been strong. Cynthia needs this more than you." That was the moment Piper realized loyalty only flowed one way in this family. The betrayal deepened fast. One afternoon, Piper noticed the glass display case in the living room was empty. Her father's prized vintage watch collection, pieces he'd spent decades restoring, was gone. She asked her mother, who waved it off. "Cynthia's organizing things." But that night, while Cynthia was in the bathroom, Piper saw something sticking out of her designer handbag. A crumpled receipt. From a pawn shop, her hands shook as she unfolded it. Every watch listed, sold, for a fraction of their value. Dated just 3 days after the funeral, Cynthia had been systematically looting their father's belongings before the flowers even wilted. The confrontation exploded in the living room. Piper held the receipt out like a weapon. "You stole from Dad," she said. "From his body, basically." Cynthia didn't deny it. She laughed. "Dad always promised he'd take care of me," she said, smug and unapologetic. Their mother stepped in front of her like a shield. "She's just trying to survive," she snapped. "How dare you accuse your sister?" "Accuse," Piper said. "I have proof." The slap came fast and hard. Her mother's hand cracked across her face, the sound sharp in the quiet house. "You're cold-blooded," her mother screamed. "An ungrateful child." Cynthia watched from behind her, lips curling into a small, victorious smirk. Something inside Piper broke clean in two. The girl who always tried to please her parents died in that room. In her place stood someone colder, harder, and finally awake. Piper didn't yell. She didn't cry. She turned, grabbed her coat, and walked out into the Milwaukee winter storm. Snow whipping against her face as she made a silent VOW. No more sacrifices. No more begging for love. Boundaries would be forged in fire, and this time, she would not be the one left bleeding. A month after the funeral, when the casseroles stopped coming and the house finally went quiet, Piper tried to do something ordinary. File her taxes. She expected it to be painful in the emotional sense. Another reminder that her father was gone and her family fractured. She didn't expect the software to freeze and flash a warning across the screen. Duplicate filings detected. First, she assumed it was a glitch. Then another alert popped up. Unrecognized accounts. Outstanding balances she didn't recognize. Piper felt that familiar cold creep up her spine, the same feeling she'd had listening to sirens through the phone weeks earlier. She didn't call her mother. She didn't call Cynthia. She called Leo. Leo was an old college friend, one of those people who could make a living sound calm and logical. He worked in cybersecurity and digital forensics, and when Piper explained what she was seeing, his voice lost its casual tone. "Don't touch anything else," he said. "Bring me everything." 2 days later, Piper sat at Leo's kitchen table while his laptop hummed softly between them. The room smelled like coffee and electronics, and for the first time in weeks, she felt like someone was actually on her side. Leo's fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. Accounts pulled up. Logs unfolded. Then he went quiet. "Piper," he said slowly, turning the screen toward her. "This isn't a mistake." What stared back at her didn't feel real. Her social security number had been used to open multiple high-interest payday loans. 3 new credit cards she'd never applied for. Maxed out balances. Missed payments. Tens of thousands of dollars in debt that had never touched her hands. Her credit score, something she'd built carefully over a decade, was in free fall. "This is full financial identity theft," Leo said. "Not partial. Not sloppy. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. He kept digging. Purchase histories popped up next. Designer clothing. Boutique hotels. Expensive dinners. Online shopping sprees that made Piper feel sick when she recognized the sizes, the brands, the same labels Cynthia wore so effortlessly. "She's funding her lifestyle with your identity," Leo said flatly. Then he paused again. "Here's the worst part." He pulled up the access logs. Every application, every account creation, every submission tied back to a single IP address. Her mother's house. Piper closed her eyes. It wasn't just Cynthia. It never had been. Leo explained it gently, but there was no soft way to hear it. Brenda hadn't stopped it. She hadn't questioned it. She'd provided documents, access, maybe even encouragement. Together, they drained her father's 401k retirement account, the savings he'd spent his entire working life building. Money he'd planned to leave behind for security, for stability. All of it sacrificed to protect the favorite daughter. Toxic favoritism wasn't just emotional. It was financial, systematic, ruthless. Piper didn't scream. She didn't cry. She felt something else settle in her chest instead. Clarity. Within a week, she was sitting in a quiet office across from Mr. Vance, a financial crimes attorney with steel gray hair and a voice that didn't waste words. She laid everything out. The caregiving. The inheritance demand. The pawn receipt. Leo's findings d'Amar. Vance listened, nodding slowly. "This is federal," he said. "Forged signatures, identity theft, wire fraud. Under Wisconsin law, this isn't a family dispute. It's a serious felony." He outlined the steps like a checklist. Police reports, sworn affidavits, credit freezes, cooperation with the Financial Crimes Division. Each document Piper signed felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that had been stolen. While the paperwork moved forward, Cynthia kept calling. She left voicemails demanding money for Mom's expenses. Texts treating Piper like an automated teller machine that had malfunctioned. Photos posted online. Cynthia smiling in new clothes, jewelry glinting under perfect lighting. All of it bought with debt Piper was legally drowning in. Piper said nothing. She let the calls go unanswered. Let the messages pile up. Let Cynthia believe the silence meant weakness, confusion, fear behind the scenes. Mr. Vance finalized filings. Leo coordinated with investigators. Counts were flagged. Timelines built. Evidence stacked neatly, patiently. Cynthia remained oblivious. Strutting through a lifestyle she believed she'd gotten away with stealing, never suspecting that every click, every swipe, every lie had already been documented. And when the truth finally came for her, it wouldn't arrive as an argument. It would arrive as consequences. 2 weeks before Christmas, just as Milwaukee lit up with decorations and forced cheer, Cynthia decided to burn everything Piper had left. The smear campaign started. Quietly. Then it turned horrific. It began with a staged break-in at their mother's house. A shattered window. Drawers pulled out and dumped onto the floor. Jewelry missing. Cynthia called the police, voice trembling just enough to sound convincing, and filed a report claiming Piper had assaulted her and stolen valuables in a rage. The accusation wasn't random. It was calculated. If Piper ever went to the authorities about the fraud, Cynthia wanted a paper trail that painted her as unstable, violent, unreliable, a criminal no one would believe. And Brenda backed her. Within hours, Piper's phone exploded. Her mother called every aunt, uncle, and cousin they had. She didn't tell the truth. She told a story, one where Piper was a monster, unhinged, dangerous, someone who had finally snapped after the funeral. Relatives Piper hadn't spoken to in years sent hateful messages. Some begged her to get help. Others didn't bother hiding their disgust. Social media posts followed, vague but vicious, warning people to stay away from toxic family members. Piper watched herself become a pariah in her own hometown, condemned without a single question asked. Then came the call. It was a three-way conversation. Brenda, Cynthia, and Piper. The voices overlapped, sharp and cruel. "You've destroyed this family," her mother screamed. Don't ever dare show your face in this house again. You're going to rot in a jail cell, Cynthia added, her tone almost gleeful. Piper didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She pressed record. When the insults paused just long enough for her to speak, her voice was calm, almost chilling. The truth will be revealed very soon. They laughed and hung up. 2 days later, Cynthia took it further. She emailed Piper's HR department. Attached were copies of the police report. Photos of bruises on Cynthia's arm, later proven to be self-inflicted. A carefully written message expressing concern about Piper's violent behavior and mental instability. By the end of the day, Piper was placed on unpaid administrative leave. No paycheck. No explanation to co-workers. No chance to defend herself while the company investigated. Right before Christmas, when expenses were highest and stress was already suffocating, Cynthia wasn't just trying to destroy Piper's reputation. She was trying to take away her livelihood. But Piper had already stopped reacting emotionally. She moved strategically now. She walked into Mr. Vance's office with a folder thick enough to slam onto the desk. Alibi evidence. Timestamp security footage from her apartment complex, showing she never left the building the night of the alleged break-in. GPS data from her vehicle proving she was miles away. Phone records, credit card receipts, and the recordings. Mr. Vance listened to the three-way call in silence, his jaw tightening as Brenda's voice rang through the speaker, full of threats and disownment. "This," he said finally, "is exactly what we need." They dismantled the false police report piece by piece. The timeline didn't match. The injuries didn't align with the alleged assault. The break-in showed no forced entry consistent with an outsider. Everything pointed back to fabrication. Then Piper activated the real-time bomb. She filed the formal identity theft report with the Wisconsin Department of Financial Institutions. Every digital forensic file Leo had compiled went with it. IP address logs, device fingerprints, application timestamps. Cynthia's online activity mapped cleanly to the fraudulent loans and credit cards. This wasn't rumor. It wasn't family drama. IT was data. While Cynthia and Brenda were busy playing reputation games, lying to relatives, manipulating HR, trying to isolate Piper, they didn't realize Piper was playing for their freedom. And the clock was officially ticking. They had no idea how close the consequences were. 3 days before Christmas, Milwaukee felt like it was holding its breath. Store windows glowed warm against the cold. Carols spilled out of coffee shops, and strangers wished each other happy holidays on crowded sidewalks. For everyone else, it was a season of comfort and tradition. For Piper, it was a private war. She checked into a high-rise luxury rental downtown, a building of glass and steel with a doorman who didn't ask questions and security cameras that never blinked. It was far enough from her mother's house that no one would accidentally run into her. Sanctuary. For the first time in her life, she would spend a holiday alone, on her own terms. She opened a bottle of expensive red wine and laid out her favorite foods on the counter, not to celebrate, but to remind herself that survival didn't have to feel like punishment. Most of her days were spent on the phone, hour after hour. Piper worked through fraud departments, freezing every account tied to her stolen identity. Each call was tedious, draining, infuriating. Verification questions, holds, explanations repeated until her throat felt raw. But one by one the accounts locked down. Alerts were placed. Access was flagged. Any future attempt to open credit in her name would trigger immediate notifications. She thought of it as cutting off oxygen. Cynthia's extravagant lifestyle, her clothes, her parties, her illusion of success, had been fueled by theft. Now it was suffocating in real time, and between calls, Piper met with Mr. Vance. This time his tone was different. Final. "The district attorney has everything," he said. "Authorities are ready to move." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were confirmations, filed charges, signed warrants, timelines coordinated down to the hour. Evidence of forged mortgage signatures, bank affidavits, digital forensic reports tying everything back to Cynthia with brutal clarity. "This," Mr. Vance said, tapping the folder, "is the final nail." Piper nodded. He felt calm. Too calm. There's no turning back, he added. I know, she said. For any of us. That night, Piper unpacked a small box she'd carried with her since leaving her parents' house. Inside were the few things she'd managed to save before Cynthia stripped the place bare. Her father's military medals, a handful of faded photographs, a letter he'd written years ago, the ink soft with age. She polished the medals carefully, then placed everything into a velvet-lined box. This wasn't nostalgia. It was protection. Greed would not be the last word on her father's life. She closed the lid. Piper accepted something she'd been avoiding. She would never speak to her family again. On Christmas Eve morning, she sent one final text to her mother, I won't be coming. Don't wait up. No explanation. No emotion. Her mother didn't reply. That silence said everything. Cynthia, however, interpreted it differently. To her, Piper's disappearance looked like surrender, like guilt, like a retreat. She believed she'd won, kept the house, the inheritance, the narrative. Piper let her believe it. Before noon, Piper finalized the digital dossier. It was comprehensive and merciless. The full extent of the debts, every fraudulent loan application, every forged signature, every IP address and timestamp. She scheduled its auto-distribution for one precise moment, when the arrest would begin. Creditors, financial institutions, even local news tip lines. There would be no narrative Cynthia could spin. No room to play the victim. No one left to blame. That evening, snow fell softly over the Milwaukee skyline, dusting rooftops and streets in white. Piper stood at the window of her high-rise, wine glass in hand, feeling a cold, steady sense of justice settle in her chest. Tomorrow, the world Cynthia built on lies would crumble across town. The family house glowed with festive lights. Carols played. Relatives who had turned their backs on Piper laughed and drank, packed shoulder to shoulder in warmth and denial. Cynthia floated through the room in a designer gown, champagne flute raised, every inch the generous benefactor. Appetizers, charged to stolen credit cards, lined the tables. She basked in attention, soaking up admiration as if she'd earned it. The peak of the party. Cynthia tapped her glass to make a toast. The front door swung open. Uniformed officers stepped inside, followed by federal investigators in plain clothes. The music cut off mid-note, leaving a silence so sudden it felt violent. Guests froze. Drinks hovered inches from lips. Cynthia Hale, the lead investigator said, his voice carrying through the room. You are under arrest for multiple counts of federal financial fraud and felony theft of another person's identity. The color drained from Cynthia's face. She screamed, pointed wildly. Piper set me up, she shrieked. She's jealous. She's crazy. An aunt whispered, horrified. Have we been lied to this entire time? Cynthia's arms were pulled behind her back. Steel cuffs snapped shut. They led her through the front door and down the driveway, past two patrol cars flashing red and blue against the snow. Neighbors stood on their porches, watching. The image Cynthia had worked so hard to curate shattered in public, replaced by sobbing, struggling reality. And miles away, high above the city, Piper watched the notifications roll in. Justice had arrived. 11:55 p.m. Piper's phone vibrated on the glass table beside her. She already knew who it was. She was alone in the quiet downtown rental, the city lights muted by falling snow. When the single permitted call came through, Piper answered without hesitation. What the hell did you do? Cynthia screamed, her voice jagged and unrecognizable. Sirens wailed faintly in the background. Why are there two police cars here? Piper leaned back in her chair, listening. You ruined everything, Cynthia sobbed, breath hitching between words. You destroyed my life. They're saying fraud, federal fraud. This can't be happening. You're my sister. The lies had nowhere left to hide. Every excuse collapsed under the weight of evidence, and what remained was panic. Raw, desperate, unhinged. Piper felt no joy, no sadness, only finality. You destroyed it yourself, Piper said calmly, her voice steady and distant, the second you decided to touch Dad's money. She ended the call without waiting for a response and blocked the number. The cycle of abuse ended with silence. By morning, Milwaukee was buried under heavy snow. The news moved fast, Banks froze accounts. The family home was flagged for massive mortgage fraud. Signatures forged, illegal loans stacked like dominoes. Legal protections vanished overnight. The foundation the house stood on had been a lie, and it collapsed all at once. Foreclosure notices followed. Brenda's calls began before noon, voicemail after voicemail flooded Piper's phone. Her mother's voice was thin, cracking, begging. "Please," she cried. "We can fix this. We can use the inheritance to help Cynthia. Withdraw the charges. She won't survive prison." It wasn't remorse. It was panic. That night, Piper answered one final call. "I am on my knees," her mother sobbed. "Begging you. Your toxic favoritism led us to this disaster," Piper replied, her tone cold but controlled. "You truly are a heartless child," Brenda snapped through tears. "I'm just the only one left with the courage to tell the truth," Piper said, and hung up. Then she did something she'd been holding back for months. Piper posted the full digital dossier to the family group chat: police reports, forensic logs, forged documents with her stolen signature, IP address data, timelines that couldn't be argued away. Within minutes, the chat went silent. No accusations, no defenses, just the soundless collapse of denial. The eviction followed quickly. Bank representatives served papers. There was no money left. Cynthia had drained everything. Brenda packed what she could into a few small boxes and moved into a state-subsidized senior apartment across the city. She left behind the house Piper's father had worked his entire life to build. Isolation was the final consequence. Piper changed her phone number, deleted old social media profiles, let Mr. Vance handle all legal inquiries. Every aunt, uncle, and cousin who had doubted her was blocked without explanation. She left Milwaukee. 1 year later, she lived in a different city entirely. Place where no one knew her past. Where no one could weaponize her loyalty or confuse kindness for weakness. Cynthia was in her second year of a 3-year federal sentence. Gray walls, no glamour, buried under debt she would never escape. No one left to believe her lies. Brenda spent her days alone, reaching out through relatives who were ignored. Her regret came from discomfort, not understanding. Piper rebuilt everything. Her career thrived. Her finances were secure. Her peace was real. No knot of anxiety in her stomach. No fear of the next betrayal. Silence became the most valuable thing she owned. Walking away had been the hardest decision of her life, but also the most honorable. DNA didn't justify abuse. Love didn't mean surrender. Protecting her peace was an act of self-respect, and honoring her father meant refusing to let greed be his legacy. Family isn't always a safe harbor. Blood doesn't excuse violation. Kindness without boundaries is. Thank you for listening to this journey from betrayal to absolute freedom. Subscribe for more stories about resilience, justice, and reclaiming your life. I'll see you in the next one.